Greetings and context of the Atlanta serial murder case, 2006 to 2008. Let me rewind the clock and invite you into the chilling heart of Atlanta, Georgia, in the mid-2000s, a city bursting with culture, nightlife, and opportunity, yet shadowed by the lurking terror brought by an elusive predator. The years 2006 to 2008 witnessed an unsettling wave of fear gripping Atlanta's young women, especially those seeking simple pleasure or just transit after dark. Picture the bustling city blocks, echoing laughter outside karaoke lounges, neon-lit diners and crowded bus terminals hosting a constant flow of hopeful faces. Beneath this lively facade, something far more sinister was stirring. Atlanta, known for its musical heartbeat, southern hospitality and booming entertainment districts, suddenly found itself facing headlines of missing women, students, junior office workers, bar servers, mostly seen last at night near entertainment venues or public transportation stops. The city's vibrant nightscape became a source of anxiety. Parents grew anxious with every late-night phone call, and local authorities braced themselves as the disappearances mounted. Whispered rumors in barbershops and corner stores soon solidified. There was a pattern, and it was terrifying. The Atlanta Police Department, APD, well-trained but strained, began piecing together reports from Midtown to Buckhead to the quiet suburbs. Each story shared haunting similarities: a young woman vanishing without a trace, last glimpsed chatting on her phone or waiting for a bus, friends recalling brief exchanges filled with laughter, only for the night to swallow up the memory. Atlanta's diverse communities felt the impact. Families in Marietta, students from Georgia Tech, and downtown workers found themselves bound by a constant nagging dread. Media outlets quickly latched on, warning women to travel in groups, avoid isolated bus stops, and reconsider weekday adventures. The city's signature energy was still present. Gospel choirs echoed through church halls, music festivals painted summer weekends, yet beneath it all was a city collectively holding its breath. Law enforcement ramped up patrols, activists demanded more public safety resources, and local news anchors repeated the same somber plea: stay alert, trust no strangers, and report anything suspicious. The case didn't just dominate the evening news, it seeped into Atlanta's very DNA. For many women, what used to be a typical Friday night out transformed into a nerve-wracking gauntlet. Mothers called their daughters twice as often. Uber and taxi drivers found themselves under new scrutiny. Atlanta, famed for reinvention and resilience, now wrestled with a shadow it could not name or see, a pattern of violence that would shape a generation's collective memory. It was during this period, between 2006 and 2008, that the mythos of the so-called Atlanta Dreamboat Killer took form. Tall tales and genuine reports twisted together. A man with striking looks, an unflappable charm, moving like a phantom amid the city's perpetual motion. Police sketches and witness descriptions painted a picture equally entrancing and chilling. The reality would eventually prove even darker, with the case testing the city's trust in authority and its very sense of community. Against this backdrop, the city would experience some of the most tense and heart-wrenching months in its modern history. As we dive into the details of specific cases, remember the tension that bound Atlanta's people together: hope, fear, resilience, and a desperate longing for answers in the face of an unknown and predatory force. Portrait of the handsome Atlanta guy. If you ever walked the midnight streets of Atlanta during those infamous years between 2006 and 2008, you might have heard whispered stories about a man who moved like a shadow between the neon lights. The media branded him with a name that was as chilling as it was captivating: the Atlanta Dreamboat Killer. Unlike the classic image of a disheveled, brooding menace, this individual overturned every expectation and got under the city's skin in a way that only someone with genuine magnetism could. This wasn't just a criminal, he was an enigma wrapped in tailored suits and charming smiles. Witnesses, bartenders, late-night waitresses, and subway staff offered eerily consistent descriptions. Tall, probably 6 feet or a shade over, athletic build, sharp cheekbones, piercing blue eyes, and hair kept just messy enough to seem accidental. Some claimed his voice carried a low, soothing drawl. There was a subtle, artisan stubble to his jaw. His confidence was disarming, his wit quick, and his mannerisms sophisticated enough to make even the most wary person drop their guard. But what set him apart, what made even the local news anchors wary when describing his profile, was the contradiction written all over his presence. He appeared harmless, almost sweet, the type to hold doors open, make polite jokes to cab drivers, or tip generously at a diner. The women who crossed paths with him described short encounters full of laughter or casual banter. It was this very likability that made his crime so earth-shattering. He was the man no one would suspect, the one your mother might invite in for a cup of sweet tea if he came knocking with a smile. Atlanta's social circles began musing on his persona much like a dark celebrity. Social media, burgeoning at the time, swapped stories. Someone's friend of a friend shared an Uber with him. A college student claimed he bought her coffee while waiting for a bus. Urban myth tangled with reality. The Dreamboat Killer wasn't just a face on a wanted poster, but a rumor that haunted every late-night gathering. Some even found themselves infatuated by his image, fanning the flames of his legend in ways the police found deeply frustrating. Police sketches and artist renderings only heightened the obsession. The press ran composite images on the evening news, stirring fascination and horror in equal measure. For law enforcement, his good looks became a curse. Tips poured in from every direction, swamping investigators with claims from would-be witnesses, many of whom were influenced by media hype and the growing mythos. Every handsome stranger was now a potential threat, every new acquaintance the subject of whispered suspicion. Yet beneath that sleek exterior, there were unsettling details that only investigators and later the surviving victims would truly understand. Multiple reports noted a chilling calm in his eyes when conversation wandered into uncomfortable territory. Some described an abrupt shift in demeanor if asked personal questions, like a light flickering out behind his eyes, replaced by a cold, appraising stare. This sharp duality, the charisma and the menace, became his signature, enabling him to slip into the night with devastating ease. In the end, the city had to confront the unnerving truth that evil could look like the man holding the elevator door, the stranger offering directions, or the polite regular at a neighborhood bar. The legend of the Atlanta Dreamboat Killer is a painful lesson for the city, a reminder that sometimes danger arrives dressed to the nines, armed not with brute force but with a lethal, beguiling charm. The mysterious disappearance of college student Sarah Parker, December 19, 2008, dawned cold and gray over Atlanta, Georgia. The streets shimmered with a pale winter haze as holiday decorations blinked feebly through the mist. For most, it was an ordinary Friday, one of those days when the city seemed to slip quietly beneath its own weight, the rattle of buses and the hum of commuters lost beneath woolen scarves and hurried footsteps. But for the Parker family, everything was about to change. Sarah Parker, barely 21, radiated the easy confidence of youth. A student at Georgia State University, and a resident of the leafy Marietta suburbs, she'd built a simple collegiate rhythm between school, part-time work at a local coffee shop, and weekend hangouts with friends downtown. As the semester wound down, Sarah texted her family that she would be home in time for dinner, as always catching the familiar MARTA bus route from campus. By dusk, concern began to seep in. The Parker home, usually filled with casual banter and the clatter of dishes, grew tense. Her phone had last pinged just before boarding the bus, but after that, nothing. No calls, no texts. Her seat at the dinner table remained empty while uneaten food cooled in its dish. Hours ticked by. By 10, Sarah's parents called her friends. None had seen her. Calls to the bus company, her job, even campus security turned up no new information. Anxiety swelled and the first ripple of dread reached outward. Sarah was missing. The following morning, the Parker family filed a missing persons report with the Atlanta Police Department. Officers immediately recognized an uneasy pattern. Sarah was not the first young woman to vanish under eerily similar circumstances. Her case was prioritized, launching an urgent appeal to the public via late-breaking news bulletins and social media posts. A smiling photo of Sarah, her blue eyes crinkled at the corners, was shared across every Atlanta feed. Investigators retraced every step. Surveillance tapes from campus, bus depots, and street corners were reviewed frame by frame. A commuter recalled seeing Sarah waiting by herself at the Midtown Health Clinic stop, a detail that suddenly seemed significant. Police checked local hospitals and urgent care clinics but found no trace. Detectives scrutinized Sarah's electronic footprint. Her phone disconnected at 3:43 p.m., just west of the city's Grant Park district. It was a pocket of Atlanta that grew quiet after dark, its empty lots and narrow alleys casting long, cold shadows in the winter twilight. By evening, a lead surfaced. Sarah's debit card had been used at an ATM near West End. Security footage showed a stocky man, face partially obscured by a hood and a surgical mask, withdrawing cash. The police studied the video, hunting for distinguishing features, but the image was maddeningly vague. Nevertheless, this clue tethered Sarah's fate to a stranger's hurried movements, and the case gained momentum. The Parker family endured an agonizing media storm. Cameras camped on their front lawn, reporters knocked as friends and neighbors dropped off casseroles and words of hope. Local student groups organized search efforts, scattering flyers along bus routes and in the bustling squares of downtown Atlanta. Candlelight vigils flickered in churchyards, each flame a tiny protest against the mounting fear gripping the city's women. Behind the scenes, detectives worked around the clock, mapping cell tower pings, cross-checking recent ATM transactions, compiling an ever-lengthening list of possible suspects. Each promising lead was pored over, culled from a haze of anonymous tips and false sightings. Sarah's disappearance transfixed Atlanta. In a city already on edge, the case was a chilling reminder that safety was never guaranteed, even in broad daylight, even when following the safest route home. For many families, Sarah's story became an urgent plea. Watch out for your daughters, call if they're late, don't let anyone walk alone. It was fear, it was anger, but above all, a stubborn, flickering hope. Maybe, somehow, Sarah Parker would be found and Atlanta could exhale again. The search and the first traces. The moment Sarah Parker was reported missing, all semblance of normalcy shattered for the Parker family and soon after for a wide circle in the Atlanta community. Her parents, racked with worry and panic, dialed every friend, classmate, and acquaintance in her network. At the university, anxious faculty and students checked classrooms and study halls, retracing her likely steps with a desperate hope that she had simply lingered with friends or lost track of time. Flyers with Sarah's smiling photograph and essential details, age, height, last seen location, were printed overnight and handed out at coffee shops, campus buildings, bus stops, and along busy downtown sidewalks. As news spread, volunteers quickly joined search parties bundled against the chill, combing through vacant lots, wooded trails, and every corner of the notorious MARTA system. Police ramped up their presence, canvassing neighborhoods between Georgia State's campus and Sarah's Marietta home. Investigators reviewed public transit camera footage, seeking any visual evidence of Sarah's path after she left campus. The pressure was immense. Atlanta had already been on edge due to other disappearances in recent years, and this latest case struck painfully close to home. It wasn't long before the first scrap of information trickled in. A witness, a hospital orderly heading home late that afternoon, contacted authorities, describing a young woman matching Sarah's appearance at the Midtown Health Clinic bus stop. The tip, though small, guided searchers to a specific stretch of blocks, where police focused their questions and crowd canvassing. Officers retraced the exact route Sarah likely took, through busy intersections, past strip malls and quiet residential pockets. Detectives pored over CCTV footage from the area, walking frame by frame through hours of grainy video for even the briefest glimpse of the missing student. Meanwhile, the Parker family, refusing to sit idly by, rallied neighbors and church members, forming search teams that blanketed local parks, creek beds, and alleyways typically ignored in daily city life. These searches were exhausting and often disheartening. Each time hope swelled, it withered as once promising leads fizzled out. Still they pressed on, driven by love and the desperate belief that their daughter would come home. The police, for their part, called in reinforcements and worked closely with federal agencies to map Sarah's digital footprint. They issued public appeals on television and radio, asking anyone with relevant dashcam or security camera footage from that afternoon to come forward. Cell phone records, bank transactions, and even street parking receipts were scoured for clues. A monumental investigative effort that grew with each hour Sarah remained missing. The communal sense of purpose across Atlanta was palpable. Candlelight vigils appeared on the steps of churches and city halls as classmates stood shoulder to shoulder, refusing to let Sarah's name vanish into just another cautionary headline. Yet beneath the candlelight and the noise was a gnawing dread. This search, like so many before it, could end in unspeakable tragedy, or maybe against all odds, it would not. Technology traces and tracking down the perpetrator. In the sprawling modern cityscape of Atlanta, technology was evolving just as quickly as the dangers lurking within it. As the investigation into Sarah Parker's disappearance gained momentum, the Atlanta Police Department quickly recognized that the digital age offered tools and clues that had never before been available to law enforcement. This chapter of the case marked a dramatic shift. Gone were the days of relying solely on tips, posters, and shoe-leather detective work. Now, the digital world hummed with echoes that could reveal the unseen steps of both victim and predator. Within hours of Sarah's vanishing, detectives sprang into action, leveraging every shred of electronic data available. The first task, triangulating Sarah's last known movements from her cell phone. In those days, nearly every young Atlantan carried a mobile, pinging cell towers as they moved from one part of the city to another. Investigators requested records from Sarah's phone provider and began to map out her digital footprint minute by minute. It soon emerged that the device had stopped transmitting signals abruptly at 3:40 in southwest Atlanta, a mundane timestamp in the grand scheme of things, but in the context of a missing persons case, it was the equivalent of a flare in the night sky. Painstakingly, analysts laid out the arc of her phone's journey, drawing crimson lines across digital maps as each ping from a cell tower painted a ghostly path stretching from her university campus through increasingly isolated neighborhoods. These data points breathed new urgency into the search. Police cars fanned out to the area, while teams on foot scoured alleyways and abandoned lots. The knowledge that Sarah's last electronic trace vanished in a specific quadrant focused their efforts with laser precision, saving hours, if not days, of fruitless searching. Simultaneously, detectives combed through Sarah's banking activity. It was a stroke of luck that, within hours of her disappearance, her debit card had been used at an ATM several miles from where her phone had last been active. This, too, was a signpost on her final journey, and perhaps more troubling, suggested she had either been forced to reveal her PIN, or her abductor now had access to her most personal items. Surveillance footage from the ATM became a focal point. In the grainy, low-resolution night vision, officers could just make out the figure of a man, face blurred and hidden under a hat and disposable mask, withdrawing money quickly with nervy urgency. Digital evidence didn't stop there. As lead investigator Deborah White later reflected, the ATM withdrawal sent ripples through the entire investigative team. For the first time, she recalled, we realized we were dealing with someone who understood just enough about modern technology to cover his tracks, but not enough to be invisible. The team pored over security camera footage from buildings near the ATM, traffic cameras on adjacent intersections, and city-owned bus and train terminals where Sarah might have been seen, or where her potential captor's vehicle might have passed. Hours of pixelated video became the battleground for pattern recognition, as detectives searched for a consistent face, car, or even just a recognizable stride in the flow of commuters. As if threading a needle in a hurricane, forensic analysts dug into the background data, metadata from Sarah's last text messages, the sequence of failed login attempts on her social media, even the timing of her last posts or check-ins just before she vanished. In a city blanketed with public and private cameras, the tiny constellation of digital traces became breadcrumbs pointing simultaneously toward horror and hope. With each step, the investigation highlighted both the promise and the peril of the digital age. Technology, while powerful, wasn't a magic bullet. The killer was elusive, and the surge of tips, often prompted by the spread of news on social media, threatened to drown out genuine leads with noise. Accounts got hacked, false sightings spread rapidly, and every piece of new data required meticulous verification. Yet, the fusion of tireless police work and digital sleuthing produced breakthroughs that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. Each byte of data, when interpreted skillfully, edged the investigation closer to identifying the ghostly presence that haunted Atlanta's nights. In the story of Sarah Parker and the Atlanta Dreamboat Killer, technology was both sword and shield, exposing secrets but also showing how quickly those traces can fade when darkness descends. The mysterious vehicle revealed. The breakthrough came not through intuition or a tip-off, but from the faint, persistent eye of technology, a city traffic camera. Footage taken from an intersection adjacent to the ATM, where Sarah Parker's debit card was used, became the catalyst for a new phase in the investigation. Detectives, growing weary from days of combing through fruitless leads and dead ends, pored over hours of footage, taxicabs, blinking turn signals, faded sedans rolling through winter drizzle. Among all the mundanity, one detail flashed like a beacon, a black Ford idling curbside for several minutes shortly before the card was used. What initially appeared inconspicuous grew increasingly suspicious in context. The car was captured on multiple cameras traveling a circuitous route from the university campus through residential neighborhoods, its movements aligning perfectly with the brief window in which Sarah disappeared. Investigators ordered a deeper dive into the vehicle's registration. The plates led them, somewhat unexpectedly, to a modest house in Decatur, a quiet, tree-lined suburb east of the city, far from the thrum of downtown Atlanta and its transient nightlife. The registered owner was Margaret Johnson, a retired widow in her early 70s who had lived alone for nearly a decade. When officers arrived on her doorstep, she answered with confusion and worry, wringing her hands as she explained that she hadn't driven in months. She managed, after careful prodding, to reveal that her son, Andrew Johnson, often borrowed the car for trips into Atlanta, especially late at night. That detail sent a ripple through the investigative team. Andrew's age, physical description, and recent whereabouts immediately drew their attention. Detectives worked rapidly, pulling up a background check. Andrew Johnson, 40, unmarried, employed as a massage therapist, had no major criminal record, only a handful of minor traffic violations. His mother claimed he was respectful, charismatic, but prone to long absences and secretive habits she chalked up to the stress of city life. "He never really settled, you know," Margaret recounted, her voice trembling as she watched the officers scribble notes. By piecing together the Black Ford's travel logs, parking tickets, and gas station surveillance images, the investigators mapped Andrew's recent movements with unnerving accuracy. The data not only placed him in the vicinity of both the ATM and Sarah's last known location, but also revealed a troubling penchant for frequenting the city's nightlife corridors. Records from toll booths and security gates were quietly subpoenaed, revealing an almost nightly pattern of driving between Decatur and various points across Atlanta, sometimes for hours on end. Further analysis unearthed more unsettling connections. In the week leading up to Sarah's disappearance, the Ford had been flagged by parking enforcement near two other locations tied to the ongoing investigation, both sites where young women had vanished under mysterious circumstances. It was as if this unremarkable vehicle, usually associated with suburban errands, had been silently gliding through the city's darkest currents, ferrying secrets no one could have anticipated. Forensic technicians dusted the Ford for prints and combed its interior with painstaking care. Under the passenger seat, wedged against a tangle of charging cables and loose change, they discovered a delicate silver earring, matching a pair Sarah's mother had described. Buried in the trunk, beneath a layer of old towels, a single strand of long auburn hair clung to the upholstery, a detail so minute, but so devastatingly significant. These discoveries transformed the car from a clue to a linchpin in the case, its every scratch and crumb suddenly ripe with sinister possibility. The reality of what detectives were dealing with came into sharp focus. No longer theory, the Black Ford was now a tangible link between the shadowy suspect and his victims, a mobile stage for unspeakable acts. Surveillance units were deployed to monitor the Johnson household, marking a subtle but critical escalation in the investigation. Each change in Andrew's routine, a late-night drive, an unplanned detour, was logged and dissected, building a mountain of circumstantial evidence. The city watched, holding its breath, as law enforcement inched ever closer to unmasking the true risks that had quietly haunted Atlanta's streets for years. Trace and confront the suspect. The final pursuit of the man believed to be Atlanta's shadowy serial predator marked a new level of intensity and peril. Detectives, having built an intricate case through technological leads, physical evidence, and countless hours of plainclothes surveillance, were now ready to close the net around Andrew Johnson, the prime suspect whose actions had sent shockwaves across Atlanta. Yet, as often happens in high-stakes investigations, the move from mounting suspicion to direct confrontation is a psychological and strategic test for all involved. Having traced the Black Ford and cross-referenced vehicle movements with police CCTV timelines, the investigative team established a pattern. Andrew's commutes through the city, his discreet stops, even his seemingly normal routines were mapped on a wall-sized board at APD headquarters. Teams rotated shifts to ensure he was never unwatched. Tension ran high. They feared that one misstep might send him underground again, or worse, that he might strike before they could intervene. Agents orchestrated their approach carefully, dividing into an arrest team and backup surveillance, while another worked on securing the necessary warrants, not just for his apprehension, but for his workplace, personal effects, and digital records. There was an awareness among the group that this was not merely an arrest. It was the threshold between Atlanta's nightmare and the hope of closure for victims. The operation day dawned wet and gray, echoing the city's dread. Undercover vehicles fanned out along Andrew's usual morning commute. As soon as he left his mother's Decatur home, investigators tailed his every move with a precision bordering on the obsessive. Researchers cross-checked live GPS logs and license plate scanners pinged at key intersections, always feeding live updates to the surveillance command post. Every time Andrew stopped for gas or paused at a red light, officers in civilian clothes lurked nearby, radios murmuring in anticipation. At noon he pulled into the small lot behind the massage therapy clinic where he worked, a nondescript commercial building in a quiet suburb. The arrest team, dressed inconspicuously, waited until Andrew emerged, bag in hand and seemingly oblivious to his looming fate. Moving in tight formation, 3 detectives intercepted him before he could get into the black Ford. The arrest was both swift and surprisingly calm, years of tactical training collapsing into a 30-second encounter as Andrew, confronted by badges and steady voices, offered little resistance beyond a shocked protest. "What is this about?" Inside the station, the interrogation process began. Detectives, sensitive to the need for admissible evidence, started by reading Andrew his rights, keeping every question meticulously on record. He maintained veiled politeness but offered no genuine emotion. His story, rehearsed and tightly controlled, was that he'd never met Sarah Parker, knew nothing about the other missing women, and had no explanation for the day in question. But data didn't lie. His phone location history, security videos, and digital footprints painted a damning tapestry. Each time Andrew offered a denial, detectives countered with precise timelines or images. The psychological chess match grew intense as he realized the web had closed in around him and that every alibi he proposed could be checked, every imagined detail disproved. Through it all, the officers remained conscious of the larger stakes. They were standing in not only as representatives of the law, but also as the personification of Atlanta's communal hope for justice. Each piece of evidence produced, each calmly articulated question moved them closer to the truth. There was no movie-like confession, no dramatic outburst, just the relentless, grinding process of dismantling years of secrets under professional, relentless scrutiny. By the time the interview ended, Andrew's composed demeanor had been chipped away, and the groundwork was laid for the next, and most devastating phase in unraveling his crimes. As he was taken from the interview room in handcuffs, a city that had waited in terror for years finally glimpsed the beginning of an end to its ordeal. Physical evidence and a chilling confession. The collection of hard evidence against Andrew Johnson would become one of the most painstaking and emotionally charged phases of the entire investigation. By this stage, the Atlanta Police Department had shifted from educated guesses to cold forensic analysis, a transition that required not only technical skill but also the emotional resilience to confront some of the darkest realities imaginable. On the early morning of January 23, 2009, officers executed a search warrant at the modest Decatur home Andrew shared with his aging mother. The winter air felt suffocating as investigators in latex gloves and blue coveralls fanned out through bedrooms, garage, and yard, their every move recorded by the blinks of media cameras parked along the silent street. Their first horrific discovery came in the form of 2 vehicles, both recently burnt nearly beyond recognition and tucked behind a shed at the rear edge of the property. The acrid smell of melted upholstery still hung in the air, and it was immediately clear these fires had been no accident. Detectives understood. Someone was desperate to erase damning traces. Forensic teams swarmed, sifting through warped metal and soot. Beneath charred debris in the trunk of the older car, they recovered several personal effects: a student ID card emblazoned with Sarah Parker's smiling face, a charm bracelet, and in a baggie stuck to the side panel, an undelivered Christmas letter Sarah had written to her parents. It was a moment that stunned even seasoned officers. Crime scene photographers captured everything meticulously, knowing these finds would become centerpieces at a future trial. But the evidence did not end there. Inside Andrew's room, tucked into a false compartment behind a bookshelf, police discovered a cache of women's jewelry, hair ties, and bits of clothing. Each item was photographed, tagged, and run through databases of open missing persons cases from across Georgia and neighboring states. DNA analysis confirmed what the city had feared. At least 3 items were linked conclusively to victims from the previous year's disappearances, tying the pattern together irrevocably. The mounting pressure and the precision with which all alibis crumbled brought Andrew to a crucial breaking point during his 4th day in police custody. For hours he had maintained an icy politeness, answering questions with rehearsed vagueness. But confronted with the montage of personal belongings, cell tower data, and security footage, his demeanor finally splintered. The confession came haltingly at first, a muttered acknowledgement of being at the bus stop where Sarah vanished, then, through choked words, a chilling description of how he had lured, attacked, and disposed of her remains. He spoke with flat detachment, offering directions to a remote patch of woodland on the city's edge. Officers listened in grim silence, shocked less by his admission than by the cold rationality with which he described the steps he took to cover his tracks. The search of the wooded area Andrew identified yielded more than just the tragic confirmation of Sarah's fate. Shallow graves, carefully concealed beneath rocks and dead branches, revealed remnants of clothing, hair, and in one case, a wallet belonging to another missing woman. Forensic teams cordoned the scene for days as evidence experts cataloged each heartbreaking artifact. The physical proof, burnt cars, collected trinkets, and hidden remains, now left little doubt about the scope of Andrew's crimes. Every sample, every twisted piece of metal, became a voice for the silenced, proving that beneath the city's surface, glamour was a wound that would take years to heal. The full tally of evidence was staggering, filling storage rooms and forming the bedrock of what would become the most notorious prosecutorial case in modern Atlanta history. It was a process that demanded relentless professionalism, yet it was, above all, a testament to the resilience and courage of those who refused to let the missing remain simply lost to time. Other pieces, the mysterious missing chain. As investigators dug deeper into the chilling saga that haunted Atlanta, it soon became clear that Sarah Parker's disappearance was far from an isolated event. The city's archives revealed a haunting tapestry of missing person cases, predominantly involving young women vanishing under mysterious but eerily similar circumstances. Each case was like a puzzle piece, on its own, tragic and frightening, but together, they formed the outline of a larger, darker pattern that had eluded law enforcement for nearly 2 years. The Atlanta Police Department established a special task force, pooling seasoned detectives and fresh-faced analysts, fluent in both traditional investigatory work and modern digital forensics. Their mission was to look at every cold case report, missing persons file, and unsolved assault from the preceding years, searching for connective tissue that might tie these tragedies to a single perpetrator or method. The city's sense of dread deepened as the scope widened. Neighborhoods once thought safe were now revisited in a new, sinister light, as maps of Atlanta filled with pins marking last known locations, strange encounters, and unexplained gaps in surveillance footage. Analysts began by establishing a timeline, meticulously aligning dates, times, and locations of each disappearance. Patterns emerged. Many victims had been last seen at or near public transit stops late at night, sometimes in the company of a well-dressed stranger matching the now infamous sketch of Andrew Johnson. Others, like Sarah, disappeared during the ambiguity of early evening, just as daylight gave way to the city's neon-lit buzz. In file after file, investigators noted similar details: cell phones that suddenly went dead near specific bus routes, ATM withdrawals made under duress, and personal belongings left behind in ways that didn't fit the victim's established habits. As the cross-referencing continued, a sense of urgency turned into near obsession among the team. Each time a new case seemed to fit the pattern, a flurry of activity would follow: interviews with family members, rechecking security footage, re-interviewing cab drivers or late-shift workers from the scenes. The common thread? A phantom figure navigating the city's shadows, blending in by appearance and demeanor, then vanishing without a trace. Social media feeds and online forums, now more closely monitored by police, buzzed with rumors and alleged sightings. Some were nothing more than urban legend, but others offered tantalizing leads that at last helped the task force build a web of connections. Crucially, advances in DNA analysis and forensic technology played a pivotal role in linking the cases. Evidence collected from abandoned vehicles, discarded items, and trace materials found at different crime scenes gradually formed a biological fingerprint. A strand of hair from one location matched fibers pulled from clothing found at another. Blood samples retrieved from a burned-out car trunk bore markers identical to victims from previous incidents, drawing a tight scientific noose around the suspect's identity. Investigators re-examined long-standing evidence, running items through new national DNA databases, and for the first time, a sequence of otherwise unconnected files began to converge on a consistent, horrifying truth. One of the most devastating breakthroughs came when a forensic genealogist was able to tie DNA from the hidden jewelry cache in Andrew Johnson's home to 3 separate missing women. Each connection confirmed suspicions, not only tightening the legal case, but also deepening the emotional wounds for families who had spent months and years in limbo. The task force, always careful not to sensationalize, communicated directly with victims' families, sharing news as leads turned to certainty. For every family that learned the truth, there was a complex mix of grief, relief, and anger, a cycle that rippled across the community. Press conferences became almost routine as the scope of the investigation came into public view. News anchors spoke in hushed, urgent tones about a serial predator moving undetected for years through Atlanta's neighborhoods, the sort of killer whose profile usually existed only in fiction. City leaders pledged new investments in public transportation safety and surveillance, while advocacy groups called for greater resources to protect the vulnerable. Candlelight vigils multiplied, each one serving both as a memorial and as a rally, public rituals designed to reclaim agency in a city battered by uncertainty. Despite the growing clarity, questions persisted. Had Andrew Johnson acted alone, or were there accomplices who facilitated his movements and alibis? Did similar disappearances in neighboring states hint at an even larger network of crimes? The sense of closure that came with each new answer was inevitably shadowed by the realization that many secrets might never be unearthed. The investigative team, driven by a mix of responsibility and exhaustion, methodically ticked through names and faces, determined not to let any thread unravel unexplored. The expanding web of evidence transformed the narrative not just for the police but for all of Atlanta. City dwellers adapted new habits and routines, women paired up for late walks, rideshares grew more careful, parents enforced stricter curfews. Outdoor festivals, once carefree celebrations, gained a subtle undercurrent of worry. Media attention turned once-forgotten victims into powerful reminders of vulnerability, and their stories were invoked in calls for change at City Hall and in the Georgia State Legislature. Ultimately, the revelation of interconnected disappearances made the Dreamboat killer case a turning point for Atlanta. No longer was the city's fear rooted in isolated incidents, it was understood as the shadow of a pattern now brought into the light. The painstaking assembly of these puzzle pieces became a testament to persistence and innovation, reshaping not just public safety but the very DNA of Atlanta's communal identity. In the aftermath, the city's resolve was steeled against future threats, but the memory of those lost still lingered, shaping each choice and caution for years to come. Childhood memories, family, and psychological deviation. Andrew Johnson's path to infamy wasn't written in a single fateful moment. It was sculpted day by day, beginning in the muted stillness of a suburban Atlanta home instantly changed by tragedy. His father died of heart failure when Andrew was barely 8. It was a moment that would etch a silent divide through his childhood. The shock and absence echoed in every corner of their modest house, shifting all the weight of emotional survival onto his mother, a gentle but overworked woman whose own grief colored her ability to nurture Andrew in the way he so desperately craved. From an early age he seemed unusually self-contained, almost disconcertingly mature. Teachers remembered him as polite but solitary. While other children clustered in packs at recess, Andrew preferred the periphery, often sketching animals or meticulously assembling model trains in the quiet of his own company. Some neighbors thought him gifted, but a few worried about his tendency to wander into the woods behind his neighborhood for hours at a time, appearing with a blank stare and muddy shoes, offering no explanation. Financial strain pressed down as mother and son survived on a patchwork of jobs, cleaning offices, waiting tables. The responsibilities forced upon his mother left Andrew largely unattended, feeding an early and insidious affection for secrecy and total autonomy. Occasionally his mother's exhaustion would crack her gentle demeanor, and Andrew would receive a rare sharp word or an icy silence, tiny emotional wounds that, for him, grew into a gnawing well of loneliness and resentment. In adolescence, the cracks widened. Teachers noted flashes of anger, short, intense outbursts when he felt slighted or ignored, followed by elaborate apologies and a return to civility. He was adept at mimicry, able to watch others' social behaviors and adopt them, but he never seemed to internalize empathy in the way his peers did. Instead, there was an air of performance, charm deployed as camouflage more than connection. Andrew's youthful romantic experiences hinted at deeper issues. His relationships with girls started genially, even sweetly, but almost invariably unraveled into jealousy, manipulation, and an overwhelming need for control. These dynamics mirrored what little he understood of adult intimacy, a confused blend of affection, power, and the looming fear of abandonment learned from watching his mother struggle and grieve. After high school, Andrew drifted. He married early and often, 4 marriages in total, each one following a similar arc of initial infatuation, mounting tension, and eventual collapse under the weight of his possessiveness and emotional distance. To the outside world, Andrew was handsome, kind, even gallant. To those closest, he could be chillingly cold, exacting, impossible to satisfy. His need for dominance and control metastasized in the absence of stability. Minor run-ins with law enforcement, bar fights, disturbing the peace, were brushed off by locals as bad luck or stress from city life. But inside, something was roiling, something coiling tighter with every personal setback and perceived slight. It was this internal machinery, equal parts childhood longing, emotional deprivation, and evolving pathology, that ultimately birthed the predator Andrew would become. Experts later described him exhibiting classic signs of narcissism and sociopathy, a grandiose self-image hiding deep insecurity, a craving for affirmation and power, and a profound incapacity for remorse. To those who studied his case, Andrew Johnson embodied the most sinister paradox of all, a man shaped by wounds visible only in hindsight, using his pain not as a plea for help, but as a mask for predation. The chain of crimes does not stop. From the chilling winter of 2006 onward, Andrew Johnson's reign of terror unfolded like a venomous fog across Atlanta, one that no one perceived fully until it was too late. As the years trickled by, each act grew in both audacity and darkness, a methodical escalation born not out of recklessness, but from a growing sense of power and invincibility. Johnson did not strike opportunistically or randomly. His crimes bore the grim hallmarks of careful preparation, patience, and a predator's cold calculation. On the surface, Andrew played the role of a model civilian. He changed jobs often but always left a good impression, harmless, even well-liked by those with whom he managed only shallow bonds. No one suspected the elaborate double life he crafted with unsettling dedication. He tailored his appearance to his victims' expectations, sometimes dressing up in business casual attire, at other times slipping into the guise of a streetwise local with his rescue dog in tow. In many ways, his capacity for reinvention echoed the city's own flux. Atlanta's promise of second chances turned on its head. Time and again, Johnson preyed on women standing at the borders of routine, waiting for a late-night bus, locking up after a restaurant shift, taking a shortcut through sleepy neighborhoods. He would offer a ride, a friendly compliment, or a bit of feigned empathy about the city's dangers. Survivors and investigators later pieced together that he mirrored the anxieties of his targets. He knew how to project safety before extinguishing it entirely. His victims, ranging in age from late teens to mid-30s, shared only fleeting circumstances, wrong place, wrong hour, trusting the wrong smile. Johnson's methods evolved as he learned from close calls. Whereas his first assaults were fraught with clumsy improvisation, by 2007 he had a routine. He scouted routes days in advance, identified places where traffic cameras faltered, and kept burner phones to thwart tracking. He drove the same battered Ford as his unassuming chariot, its interior cleaned obsessively but never enough to erase every trace. Canine hair on the seat, a smudge too stubborn for bleach, small mistakes that would only gain meaning in retrospect. Behind closed doors, Andrew kept trophies, tokens of conquest ranging from hairbands to handwritten notes. Each kept memento was stowed in hollow spaces or in the glove box, reminders not just of victory, but of his need to revisit power at will. The city's missing persons unit, unconnected in those early days, labored through each case as if it were an isolated tragedy, unaware that the web spun from a single poisoned center. As the bodies began to surface, some in the Chattahoochee's tangled reeds, others in vacant lots or beneath freeway overpasses, rumors multiplied. Women spoke in code about taxi rules and buddy systems. Still, Johnson was undeterred, driven by something more elemental than rage, the desire to assert dominance over those least prepared to resist. He seemed to feed on the very anxiety he sowed. Each headline, each televised plea from a grieving family, only deepened his resolve and sharpened his methods. Investigators later noted horrifying consistency in the timing. Most abductions occurred during the city's transition from public vibrance to solitary quiet, a threshold marked by lowering noise and dimming streetlights. Pattern analysis revealed a chilling mobility. Johnson never targeted the same area twice in succession, always rotating his haunts. This kept police guessing, the patchwork geography of his crimes turning maps of Atlanta into desperate, red-threaded puzzles. The trail that would ultimately lead to him took so long to stitch together precisely because of this methodical unpredictability. For a period, Johnson's willingness to evolve placed him at what seemed an insurmountable distance from justice. He read the news, tracked police bulletins, altered routines. If a victim got away, as happened once, he vanished from the city for weeks, only to return, emboldened, but even more careful. Law enforcement's growing list of disappearances came with a cold realization. They were facing not a mindless brute but a calculating shadow capable of striking and then dissolving almost at will. Despite mounting pressure as the years slipped into 2008 and beyond, Johnson's criminal appetite did not wane. On the contrary, each successful escape emboldened the next. The city's collective fear pressed in, but the man behind the mask only grew more convinced of his own invulnerability. That delusion, so common to serial predators, would in the end be one of his rarest and most costly mistakes. Conclusion and the legacy of obsession. The resolution of the Atlanta Dreamboat Killer case sent shockwaves through the fabric of the city, forever altering how Atlanta would view safety, trust, and the aftershocks of tragedy. Andrew Johnson's conviction and subsequent death sentence in Fulton County Superior Court was the climax of a years-long nightmare, but the echoes of his crimes would continue to haunt the streets, alleys, and hearts of Atlantans long after the trial ended. Media coverage of the trial was relentless, and the nation watched as chilling details emerged during proceedings. The prosecution methodically laid out a mountain of evidence: hair and jewelry recovered from Andrew's home, forensic links to crime scenes, and most damning of all, the recorded confession in which he described his method with bone-chilling detachment. Spectators in the courtroom sat frozen at his lack of remorse. For the families of victims, some of whom filled the wooden benches every day, clutching photographs and holding hands, the verdict offered a strange cocktail of relief and sadness. There was justice, yes, but no undoing of the loss, no simple restoration. The wounds carved by Andrew ran too deep and too wide. The verdict ignited widespread debate amongst Atlanta's citizens. Some were satisfied by the harsh sentence handed down, believing it a just end for a predator who had so cruelly manipulated the city's trust. Others, particularly in advocacy and legal reform circles, questioned whether the spectacle of a high-profile capital trial did more to sensationalize pain than to heal it. Community meetings grew spirited, with parents demanding more lighting and surveillance at MARTA stops, city councils approving increased police funding, and journalists penning essays on urban fear that made headlines around the Southeast. Beyond the institutional responses, a subtler change crept into the city's daily life. Women swapped stories of narrow escapes or suspicious encounters. College campuses launched late-night shuttle programs and invested in self-defense classes, while rideshare companies modified policies to add more robust driver background checks. Grassroots support groups for victims' families gained new urgency, expanding services for those dealing with trauma or trying to rebuild trust in the aftermath of such violence. Young people, particularly women, began to move through the city differently. Simple choices, walking home, waiting alone for a bus, even talking to a stranger at a nightclub, were weighed more cautiously, marked by the collective memory of Atlanta's darkest chapter. The city's nightlife, once pulsing and carefree, now bore an undercurrent of vigilance. For years, the urban legend of the Dreamboat Killer lingered. Whispered warnings at orientation sessions, tips exchanged among new residents, parents calling late at night to check in, just in case. Public murals and memorial gardens sprang up, etched with the names and faces of those lost, reminders of both grief and resilience. The aftershocks reached far beyond Georgia. True crime authors, documentarians, and podcasters dissected the case, turning the story of Andrew Johnson into a cautionary tale for cities nationwide. Lawmakers introduced new legislation about public safety, privacy, and how law enforcement shares suspect information. Some initiatives met resistance, and debates grew contentious. Was Atlanta becoming a surveillance city? Was it safe, or simply scared? And yet, amidst the sorrow, a current of hope slowly began to emerge. Annual victims' marches became important citywide rituals, honoring not just those lost to Andrew but all victims of violent crime. Survivor advocates pushed for systemic reforms, and new programs sprouted in schools, teaching about red flags, healthy relationships, and the importance of community watch. Old fears lingered, but so did the spirit of defiance. Families set up scholarships in the names of their daughters, neighborhoods organized their own night patrols, and art projects reclaimed streets once feared after sunset. In the end, Andrew's legacy was not simply that of terror, but of transformation. His crimes exposed wounds, but also strengthened the resolve of a city unwilling to let fear define its soul. Atlanta became a city marked by vigilance, empathy, and a hard-learned wisdom. That shadows can fall anywhere, but light always finds a way to return.